My name is Eli Barrett, 27 years old, white. I work cleaning jobs for the administrative buildings in South St. Louis, plus whatever odd handyman gigs people throw at me after hours. If you want it short, I'm the kind of guy the city only notices when something is dirty, clogged, broken, or left alone too long that nobody else wants to touch. During the day, I wear the reflective vest, steel-toe boots, pull the cart of supplies, mop hallways, polish stone lobbies, scrub toilets in buildings where men in suits walk past without ever thinking about the bleach smell that stays in the cleaner's throat. Evenings or weekends, I take extra jobs, fixing doors, unclogging sinks, scraping mold from basements, cleaning garages, painting fences. I don't have a college degree. I dropped out after 1 year. I don't have big ambitions anymore either. Some people get knocked down a few times and still talk about new opportunities. Me? I learned to live so that next month I can still pay rent. The old van still starts, and my back doesn't give out before 35. I live in a one-bedroom apartment in Westmore Flats, the kind the property manager calls a neighborhood in rebirth, while everyone who actually lives there knows it's just an old run-down complex with fresh paint slapped on the outside to hide the damp smell in the hallways. Thin walls, drafty windows. The heater clanks every time it kicks on. The back balcony looks down on an oil-stained parking lot and an all-night laundromat. It isn't pretty, but it's cheap, and for a long time, cheap was enough. The night everything started was a late September night when the rain came down, like the city wanted to push everything into the sewers. I had just gotten home from work, still smelling like industrial cleaner and old sweat, sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of bills spread out and a cold cup of coffee beside them. Outside the glass door, rain slapped the railing like someone throwing handfuls of wet gravel. Streetlights blurred behind the curtain of water. The news on my phone kept warning about flash flooding, high winds, scattered power outages. I was trying to figure out if 3 more weekend shifts this month would cover the transmission repair on the van when the doorbell rang. Once, then a second time, then a third, more urgent. I stood still in the kitchen, first annoyed, then wary, almost 10 at night. Rain like this? My neighborhood isn't the kind where people drop by politely at this hour. Either a wrong delivery or trouble. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. 2 women stood in the shared hallway. The younger one, blonde, maybe mid-20s, hugged her arms tight against the cold. The other was older, late 30s or early 40s. Dark brown hair plastered wet against her neck. A long black coat heavy with rain. And her body, the kind people would immediately call obese, showed clearly under the angled hallway light. But what caught me wasn't her size. It was the way she stood. Very straight. Very calm. Like she was still holding on to the last scrap of dignity while the rain had already worn everything else away. I cracked the door, security chain still on. Yes? The younger woman started to speak, but the older one touched her elbow lightly and spoke herself. Her voice was low, a little hoarse, but controlled so well that underneath it you could hear something cracking. I'm sorry to bother you this late. Our car broke down on the highway, phones have no signal, and nobody answered their doors. She drew a slow breath like she hated asking, could we stay here tonight? The question was so direct it made me blink, not, can we use your phone? Not, can we wait out the rain for 10 minutes? But straight to what they needed most. I answered with the plain truth. I only have 1 bed. The blonde girl flushed immediately as if she thought I was misunderstanding. But the older woman just looked at me for a short beat, then asked very quietly, does the door lock from the inside? That question hit me faster than the sight of them soaked in the hallway. Not because it was insulting, because it said so clearly that they were genuinely afraid. Had been afraid even before they knocked on my door. And what this woman needed first wasn't kindness, but a safe boundary she could still control. I unhooked the chain. Come in, I said. At least get inside before you both freeze in the hallway. The blonde girl let out a shaky breath, like she had just been saved. The older woman stepped in after her, slower by half a step, eyes never leaving my face as if she was still measuring what kind of decent this was. I'm Vanessa Hale, she said. I'm Mia, the blonde said quickly. Her sister. I'm Eli. I closed the door. The wind cut off instantly, leaving only the sound of rain tapping on the glass. And in that moment, I had no idea that the question she had just asked wasn't only opening the door to my apartment. It was opening a part of life I thought I would never touch again. My apartment had never had female overnight guests before. Not because I was some kind of saint. Just because nobody had a reason to want to stay in a place like this unless they had no choice. The living room had only an old gray sofa, a scratched low table, a cheap DIY bookshelf, a slightly crooked floor lamp with a fabric shade, and a tiny open kitchen where two people standing together would start bumping elbows. Everything was clean, but nothing was nice. Almost no decorations, no photos, no plants, no signs of a life with much imagination. Just the home of a guy who worked with his hands and came back wanting quiet enough to hear his own head. I pulled 2 old bath towels from the hallway closet and handed them over. Bathroom's on the left. There's soap, clean towels, and a couple of my old t-shirts if you want to change out of those wet clothes. Thanks, Mia said quickly, her voice small and sincere. Vanessa only nodded, her eyes sweeping the whole apartment like she was memorizing every exit, every lock, every shadow. It wasn't rude. It was just a kind of caution that had become pure reflex. I put water on to boil, mixed up hot chocolate from the few packets left in the cupboard, and checked the fridge for anything edible. Eggs, sandwich bread, a pack of sliced cheese, an apple, peanut butter. Enough so they wouldn't be hungry in the morning. Mia came out first, swimming in one of my old t-shirts that hung loose on her, her blonde hair tied back with a rubber band she must have found somewhere. Vanessa came out after her, and that was the first time I really looked at her. She was wearing one of my old dark green button-down shirts. The hem reached almost to her knees, sleeves rolled up twice. The cheap cotton somehow made her full figure look more real instead of hidden. Softer. Less armored. Her hair had been towel-dried and fell across her shoulders. Without the heavy wet coat, I noticed a thin old scar on her left wrist, running across like a memory that refused to disappear. I turned away before I stared too long. "Sit down," I said. "This hot chocolate isn't anything special, but at least it's hot." Mia dropped onto the sofa right away, holding the mug with both hands like she wanted to crawl inside the warmth. Vanessa sat on the edge of the armchair across from her, back straight, legs together, mug balanced on her knee. Rain still hammered the glass door. The ceiling light flickered once, then steadied. "We knocked on 14 doors," Mia said quietly after a few minutes of silence. Nobody answered. I looked at the two of them and said the truest thing I could. "People get scared." "And you don't?" Vanessa asked. I shrugged. "I do. I just know standing outside a door feels worse." She looked at me longer, not grateful in a movie way, but like she was checking whether that answer was real. I asked, "How exactly did your car break down?" Mia explained they had been driving from Columbia back toward Chicago, detouring to visit an old friend of hers. The heavy rain made the car hit some piece of metal on the road. Then came a grinding sound and the engine died. No phone signal. Empty stretch of highway. After knocking on too many doors with no answer, Mia had started crying right beside the car. "She wouldn't let me see her panic," Mia said, glancing at Vanessa. But I knew she was scared. Vanessa didn't deny it. She only said, almost to even the score, "You cried first." Mia gave a weak smile. The whole room felt a little lighter. "I'll pull the sofa out into a bed for you two," I said. "I can sleep on the floor or in the kitchen chair." "No," Vanessa answered immediately. "We're not taking your whole place. I really do only have one bed." "I remember." "Good. So you knew already." Mia almost laughed while still clutching her mug. In the end, I gave them the bedroom and pulled an old blanket out for myself on the sofa. But when I showed them into the room, Vanessa stopped at the doorway, looking at the simple bed with white sheets, the cheap pressed wood nightstand, the small lamp. Then she asked a question that made me realize this wasn't just a random good deed anymore. "How long have you been living alone?" I leaned against the doorframe, thought for a second, and answered, 3 years. She gave a tiny nod like she understood something beyond the number. "What about you?" I asked back. "How long have you been living in the kind of state where you have to ask if the door locks from the inside?" The question left my mouth before I realized how far it went. Mia looked at me. Vanessa stood still, hand resting on the edge of the door, her breathing like she had just been touched in a place that still hurt and she wasn't ready for anyone to name it. It took her a long time before she spoke. "Longer than I want." I didn't ask anything more. I only said, "Get some sleep. I'll look at your car in the morning." That night I lay on the sofa, eyes open, staring at the water-stained ceiling. The rain eased off. The fridge still hummed. But my head wouldn't settle. Not because two strange women were sleeping in my bed, but because of Vanessa's question and my own answer. The way she had asked about living alone like it wasn't small talk, but a way of testing whether anyone else knew what she was struggling with. The next morning I woke earlier than usual, scrambled eggs, toasted bread, brewed black coffee, and poured orange juice from a carton that was almost out of date. The breakfast was simple but hot. Mia came out first, thanking me over and over. Vanessa came out after, hair tied low, still wearing my shirt, face completely bare. The early morning light showed the tired shadows under her eyes more clearly, but it also made her look less like someone from another world. When I drove them out to the broken-down car, everything shifted hard off its old track. The car on the roadside was a new black BMW X7, the kind whose price tag was probably more than 10 years of my rent. I was still bent over checking the serpentine belt when 3 more SUVs pulled up and braked in a line. A man in a cashmere coat stepped out with 2 assistants, and the way they looked at Vanessa told me immediately. The woman who had slept in my bed was not just some random traveler. "Ms. Hale," one assistant said. Vanessa closed her eyes for a brief second, then opened them. Her face changed at once. Not smiling, not colder, just locked down. The man walked over, early 60s, neatly silver hair, pale gray eyes, a suit that didn't belong in the weather but fit perfectly. I didn't know who he was yet, but I understood right away this was the kind of man who had never had to ask permission to open any door in years. "Your father told you to call him back last night," the man said. "Father?" Mia breathed out very softly. I straightened up, grease and sweat suddenly the least important things on me. When the assistant handed me a heavy embossed business card that read, "Vanessa Hale, Executive Director, Hale Urban Foundation," I finally understood who I had let sleep in my apartment the night before. But what stayed with me longer than the card was the moment Vanessa turned to me right before getting into the car and said very quietly, "Thank you for treating me like a person, not like a problem." I had been thanked before, but no one had ever said it in a voice that sounded like it had actually saved them from drowning. 2 days later, I was invited to the Montclair Regency Hotel downtown. It wasn't the polite kind of invitation you could turn down. A car came to pick me up, someone held the door, and a table was already set. The kind of invitation that comes from rich people. The man waiting for me in the private lounge on the upper floor was Leonard Hale, Vanessa's father. He didn't waste time on small talk. He thanked me for giving his daughter shelter that stormy night. He apologized for the inconvenience. Then he went straight to business. "I've looked into your background." I leaned back in the chair, not really surprised. "I figured you would." He nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world. He knew I had dropped out of a technical construction program, knew I was doing industrial cleaning and odd handyman jobs, knew I had applied for a few site supervisor positions, but got rejected because my record was incomplete and I had no one backing me. He even knew about the few civil renovation sketches I had posted on an old portfolio site 3 years ago. "You have a good eye for the work," he said, "and your appearance makes people underestimate you enough that they get careless." I almost laughed. Sounds like a backhanded compliment. Men like me don't use extra words. Then he slid a job folder across the table toward me. The position was Field Facilities Liaison for the Hale Urban Foundation's supported housing projects. The salary was nearly double what I was making. Benefits, company vehicle, a real position. "Because I opened the door one night?" I asked. "Because I need someone who doesn't just know how to work but knows what's worth doing when no one is watching." Leonard looked straight at me. "Both of my daughters told me almost the exact same thing about you." "That's rare." Vanessa sat to his right the whole time, saying almost nothing. But once when I looked up, her eyes met mine. And what I saw there wasn't pride. It wasn't obligation either. Just the tiredness of a woman who wasn't used to receiving kindness from a man without having to pay for it somehow. I accepted the job 3 days later. Partly for the money, partly because I was tired of scrubbing floors after other people, partly because being closer to Vanessa had suddenly become something I thought about too often. And that was the real problem. I wasn't just curious about her, I was being pulled toward her. Not in the way people fall for perfect magazine beauty, because honestly, if you put Vanessa next to the slim, young, conventionally pretty girls in ads, a lot of people would pass her by at first glance. She was tall, full-figured, broader in the shoulders than the standard, with a soft round chin and heavy hips that carried the clear marks of a life that had sat heavily on her body. But the closer I got, the more I understood that the attraction wasn't about whether her body fit anyone's checklist. It was about the fact that she had learned to live inside that body, under the cruel eyes of the world, and still kept her back straight. And that truth bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I was starting to feel angry at every look other people gave her, an anger I had no right to feel. The new job pulled me into her world. I was on the ground at renovation sites for community support centers, temporary housing units, clusters of subsidized apartments funded by the Hale Foundation. I was good at field work, good at spotting which pipe would clog, which wall was eating moisture, which foundation would sink if the contractor kept cutting corners. Within a few weeks, I had proven I wasn't just a thank you gift filling an empty slot. I worked for real, and I worked well. Vanessa showed up at the sites less often, but every time she did, the air tightened. Not because she yelled. She almost never raised her voice. But she saw what others missed. A wheelchair ramp with the wrong slope by a few inches, hallway lights mounted too high, a beautiful but useless community kitchen for short elderly residents, schedules deliberately distorted in reports. Everyone respected her, and a few whispered behind her back. I heard all kinds. She's smart, sure, but too difficult. Rich people doing charity for fun. The Hale sisters are nothing but drama. And once, the worst, a deputy manager muttered, women like that are always hard to deal with. Body that heavy, her personal life must be a mess too. I slammed my pencil down on the blueprint hard enough to snap it in two. The guy smirked. What are you going to do about it? I stepped closer than was polite. Say that again. He didn't repeat it, just shrugged like a coward. But that afternoon I was called in for a warning about poor emotional control on site. Vanessa was the one who signed the confirmation form. But she called me back afterward. In the temporary office trailer at the site, it was just the two of us and the sound of the generator humming outside. You don't have to fight for me, she said. I leaned my shoulder against the doorframe. I wasn't fighting, I was just making things clear. You know better than anyone those people don't matter. No. I looked at her. I just know I hate the way they look at you. She stood still. The late afternoon light coming through the trailer window softened the lines on her face. That's the worst part, Vanessa said quietly. What is? You making me feel protected in places where I've gotten used to locking myself away. I couldn't answer right away, because I suddenly understood very clearly whatever was growing between us had already moved past simple curiosity. Our relationship didn't move from strangers to close in a straight line. It jerked forward, pulled back, tensed, then softened like rain in the wrong season. Some days she barely looked at me outside of work. Some days she called me directly just to say, "You're at the Southside site? Check the roof on the community kitchen for me. They say it's leaking." Some days I dropped paperwork at the main office and she only nodded as she walked past. But that same evening, a box of good Italian food would arrive at the site with a handwritten note. Skip lunch one more time and I'll deduct it from your paycheck. I didn't know what game this was. I only knew I started smiling to myself when I saw her handwriting. Then one evening she opened the most painful part herself. It happened after a fundraising event at an old art center the Hale Foundation was supporting. I stayed behind to help the cleanup crew because they were short-handed. Most guests had already left. Half-empty wine glasses remained. Flowers wilted in their vases. A few brochures lay trampled in the corner of the lobby. I was rolling up the entrance carpet when I saw Vanessa standing alone in the back hallway, arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the wet leaves in the courtyard. You okay? I asked. She didn't turn right away. Have you ever been in a room full of people and suddenly felt like the only one who doesn't belong? The question didn't sound like it wanted an answer, but I still gave one. Yeah, almost every day. This time she turned toward me. No smile. Just looked at me like she had just remembered I actually understood that feeling in a completely different way from everyone else in her world. My father wants me to remarry, she said. I stayed quiet. To my ex. My chest tightened, but I kept my voice even. The old fiancé? She nodded. His name was Grant Mercer, investment advisor, from a good family, the kind of man her father thought was safe. They had gotten engaged when Vanessa was 32. Everything looked perfect on paper. Until the doctors told her that because of a series of endocrine issues and complications, her chances of getting pregnant were almost zero. Grant didn't leave me the same day, Vanessa told me, her eyes fixed somewhere past my shoulder. Men like him don't want to look that cruel. He stayed. Said we would get through it together. Said love wasn't only about children. She gave a smile that hurt more to hear than crying. 6 months later, I found out he had been sleeping with a woman 8 years younger than me who was already pregnant. I clenched my jaw, not from surprise, but because that kind of betrayal was so familiar in its cruelty that hearing it only made it more sickening. My father still wants me to go back to him, she continued, because he's stable, suitable, reasonable, and above all, easy to explain to the world. And you? Me? She looked straight at me then. I'm the error in the picture. The woman who can't have children, whose body keeps getting heavier from the medication, the stress, the hormone problems, the bouts of depression, someone who no longer fits the perfect photograph. Her last sentence came out very softly, but it felt like someone had shoved a hot iron into my chest. Don't talk about yourself like that, I said. Vanessa tilted her head, tired all the way to her bones. The world said it first, Eli. I don't care what the world says. but I've had to live inside its eyes for a very long time. I wanted to step closer. I wanted to touch her. I wanted to pull her out of that invisible sentence. But I also knew a woman like her would break if I pitied her in a weak way. So I told the truth. If you think the first thing I saw in you was your weight, then you're judging me worse than I deserve. She froze. I went on. The first thing I saw was you standing outside my door in the rain, clearly scared, but still putting your sister first. The second thing was the way you walked into any room like it had to move aside to make space for you. As for your body, I shrugged. It's just the body of the woman who did those things. Vanessa stood very still for a long time. Then she asked very quietly, "Do you say things like that to a lot of women?" "I clean floors for a living. Most days I only say don't walk on the wet floor." This time she laughed for real. And the way that laugh broke free after something so heavy made the whole night feel lighter. Then she said the sentence that kept me awake. "You make me forget where I'm supposed to keep my distance." Everything truly changed the night she came back to my apartment for the second time. Not because of a storm, not because of a broken car, but because she drove there herself. It was close to 11. I had just gotten home from a late shift and hadn't even taken my boots off when there was a knock at the door. I opened it and saw Vanessa standing there in a long brown coat, hair down, face without makeup, eyes red but not crying. "Are you okay?" "No." "Come in." She stepped inside, took off her shoes by herself, like the first rainy night had never really ended between us. I made tea. She stood in the kitchen holding the mug with both hands, looking at me for a long time before she said the words that stopped everything. "I want to have a baby." Not "I am." She used "I" in a softer way for the first time with me. I didn't interrupt. I didn't cut her off. I just stood there and listened. Not because of my father, not to save my image, not to prove Grant wrong. She swallowed hard. "I want a baby because I still want to live a life that has something soft in it. I want to read stories to someone at bedtime. I want to be confused by school crafts. I want to hear little feet running in the house. I want a future that isn't only meetings, numbers, and men who think they know what stable means for me." My throat went dry. Vanessa looked straight at me. No stepping back. No circling around it. I thought about anonymous sperm donation. She gave a bitter smile. I even sat through a consultation where they talked about donors like choosing show dogs. How tall, what school, what eye color. She shook her head. I couldn't stand it. I stayed silent. Then she said the last part almost in a whisper, but clear enough to hurt. "If one day I really go through with that, I would want the father of my child to be a decent man. A man who opens the door in the rain. A man who doesn't look at me like I'm a failure." That was when I understood everything. Why she had come here tonight. Why she was shaking even though she looked calm on the outside. And why, if I gave the wrong answer, I could crack the very fragile part of her that the world had already trampled for too long. I also understood that anyone looking in from the outside would think the only answers were agree right away or panic and refuse. But my answer wasn't either of those. I stepped closer to her, took the tea mug from her hands before it could shake and spill, then looked straight into her eyes and said, "Don't ever ask me for a child like it's something you have to bargain for just to have a real life." She froze. I continued, my voice slow but very sure. "If one day we have a child, it can't be a deal to patch up the holes in your life. It has to be because we actually chose each other enough for that child to grow up in something kinder than fear." Her eyes filled with tears immediately, so fast that even she looked surprised. "Are you rejecting me?" she asked, her voice cracking a little. "No," I shook my head. "I'm rejecting the idea of you seeing yourself as someone who has to ask permission to be a mother." Tears spilled over. She turned her face away for half a second, like she hated being seen like this. I touched her chin gently, making her look at me again. "Vanessa, I won't give you something as big as a child while still letting you stand outside the story like you don't deserve to be properly loved first." I took a deep breath. If you want to know what my real answer is, here it is. I paused for one beat. Then I said, "I don't want to be just the father of your child. I want to be the man standing beside you first." I had thought those words might make her pull away in fear, but they didn't. She stood completely still, lips trembling, eyes full of tears. Then a small laugh escaped, mixed with a sob. "You really are the answer no one in my life has ever given." "Is that bad?" "Bad in a dangerous way." She stepped very close. Because you're making me think about something bigger than what I was brave enough to say. Then think about it. The first kiss came after that. Not rushed, not explosive. But like two people who understood they had just crossed a line they couldn't go back from. So they had to touch each other slowly to believe it was real. She kissed me with all the trembling she had hidden before. I answered with everything I could give. Certainty, presence, and a silent promise that I wouldn't turn her into a nighttime secret. When we pulled apart, her forehead rested against my shoulder. My father is going to lose his mind. Probably. Grant will laugh. Then he'll stop laughing. People will say all kinds of things. I clean floors for a living. They've said all kinds of things about me for years. Vanessa laughed through her tears. Then, very softly, very honestly, she asked, "Are you sure?" I looked at her. Not sure about the future, but very sure about this. I placed my hand on my chest. I don't want you to knock on the door of my life and still think you only deserve to sleep over for one night. 3 months later, her father was still angry. Grant still called a few times and then stopped. The society pages ran a vague paragraph about a distraction in Vanessa Hale's focus. She was still a full-figured woman in a world that hated women who didn't fit the picture. I was still the young guy who cleaned buildings, wore work boots, and didn't speak smoothly. But nothing was the same as before. She started staying over at my apartment, first one night a week, then more. Her muted green mug stayed on the kitchen shelf. One of her sweaters hung on the back of the chair. A toothbrush. A box of prenatal vitamins she left in the drawer next to the silverware, like a half-hidden confession that the dream hadn't disappeared. And one early winter evening, we sat at the kitchen table eating hot noodles while rain pattered on the balcony. She rested her chin on her hand, looked at me, and asked, "Do you know what I really asked that first night? Can we stay here tonight?" She shook her head. No, the real question was, is there any place in this world where I can stay without having to prove I'm small enough to fit? I put my chopsticks down, took her hand. Now you know. If anyone asked me what changed everything, I wouldn't say it was the job offer from her rich father, not the broken BMW, not the first kiss, not even the night she said she wanted a baby. It was the moment I opened the door and saw a full-figured, tired, still very proud woman standing in the rainy hallway asking, "Can we stay here tonight?" Because from that question, she wasn't only asking for a place to sleep. She was testing whether there was still any place in life decent enough to let her step inside without making her shrink herself to fit. And for the first time, I had given her the right answer.